Always wanted to bang the gavel here, so we'll do that. Call it to order. We say, yeah. Well, welcome everyone. Karen and I are very excited to be here with council members and also many people from the U.S. government. So we're looking forward to the discussion this afternoon. The prime purpose, of course, is to go through the 5 recommendations. This is our third set in the effort. But before moving on, I just want to also appreciate the great support from the White House that we've had from Secretary Pritzker and her staff in the Department of Commerce. Of course, Tricia Van Orden, who's been magnificent all the way throughout, and will probably correct many mistakes that I make during this session. And I think it's been a very collaborative process all around. We're sorry that Secretary Pritzker can't be here, but we're very excited to have you here, Deputy Secretary Andrews. I say as a Canadian, I think it's very good that they're spending time to try and deepen relationships in Canada. That's probably the only excuse I could say on that front. So, as I said, we're going to have a few opening remarks here before we get into it, hearing from Karen, hearing from both deputy secretaries, and then hearing on the trip report. I think that trip we all did together back in January. And then we'll get into the 5 recommendations and where we are. So again, we've had 3 sets. Our charter is expiring in August of this year. So this will be our last meeting as a council as it's constituted today. But we're excited that the government is committed to reauthorizing PAC DBIA's charter for another round, including new members. I think one of the things the Secretary has been making very clear to us is the durability going through cycle, no matter who's elected and where it is. This is a long-term approach to deepening business relationships between the U.S. and Africa. So we're excited that will continue. I just wanted to say a couple of things when we think about the world, which is a bit of a crazy place these days with Brexit and all sorts of comments about free trade not being a good thing and so forth. I think we should remind ourselves of the importance of trade and the importance of Africa. Even with all of the volatility and changes, Africa remains actually the second fastest growing region in the world. With the youth that we see in Africa, I think it actually represents over the long term one of the most significant opportunities that we see in the world. Africa will have the largest absolute working age population in 15 years, and we know that what drives productivity is actually labor. And so if we can help figure out how to ensure that labor gets employed and goes after the opportunities in the continent, I think we're going to see a lot of things happening. We've discovered on our trips and through otherwise quite a considerable number of large African institutions. And while there are not as many as there should be on the Global Fortune 500, there's actually 0 today, we think that's going to change significantly over the next 5 to 10 years. There are 700 businesses with over $500 million in revenue and 400 businesses with over $1 billion in revenue. And as the continent integrates more, which is something that we believe should happen and want to figure out how to help happen more, we think that's going to lead to even more significant institutions to partner with and work with from the U.S. side. That said, it's one of the least integrated continents on the planet. Last week when we wrote this up, I was going to compare it to the EU, but I may decide not to do that right now. But there are other regions that are more integrated, and I think there's many things we can learn from that. But I again see that in a positive way. So I think we should just remind ourselves this is a long-term opportunity for business. This isn't just about trying to help with aid, though that's important, and we're very happy that you're here, Gail, about what we do on that side. This is actually a long-term strategic business opportunity for U.S. companies that we are very keen that we ensure come into place. I'll turn it over to Karen.
Thanks, Dominic. I'd like to also extend a warm welcome to everyone for being here this afternoon. 18 months ago, I believe it was, we gathered and talked about what we would attempt to take on. And I'm really pleased to be here today and offer my appreciation to the White House support that we've received, the colleagues that are around the table, the agencies and so forth, that have really put together a set of recommendations that we think will address President Obama's objectives for doing business in Africa. You know, the businesses that are here have decades of experience in doing work in Africa, and we wanted to leverage that knowledge and skill to come up with ways to really support innovation and entrepreneurs across the continent of Africa. Dom just laid out some of the economic factors that give us reason to really focus on what can be accomplished in Africa. But as I said 18 months ago, it's also about the people of Africa as well, and that is by far the greatest asset that is there. As we've moved through this process, we've developed the recommendations again, and we think that it will not only strengthen our economy, but create fast-growing economies in Africa. As we think about some of the issues that we've encountered, power, reliable power continues to come to the forefront, whether it's electricity for the factories, the schools, medical centers, it remains a big, big issue. When we think about the workforce, we are very interested in skills development because the labor workforce is vital to the economy growing. With that knowledge that we have in the workforce and the opportunity to put in infrastructure, we think it can be a win-win, not only for Africa, but really for both continents. The other thing that came through in the past 18 months is there's been a lot of transparency among the governments as we've tried to work together and the agencies. And that transparency really gives people the impetus to keep this going and ultimately really provide the infrastructure and the jobs to transform people's lives. So I'm very excited about what we are going to present today. It's been a real personal joy for me to get to meet many of the people in this room and the opportunity to continue working on this really important project. So for me, serving our country in this way, our country has done so much for so many, it's truly been an honor. So with that, I will turn it back to Dom.
Thank you, Karen. I want to turn it over to Deputy Secretary Andrews to give us some comments on what the government's been doing on doing business in Africa, but also just to appreciate all the work you've been doing. I know the Secretary has big shoes, so to speak, to fill, but you more than do that, and I know all of the many things you're doing, so thank you for being with us.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dominic and Karen. I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone here today. I know that each of you and your staffs have worked very hard over the past year and a half to make PAC DBIA a real success. It's also great to see our interagency colleagues here, Wally Adiamo from NSC, Gail Smith from USAID, Lee Zach from USTDA, Elizabeth Littlefield from OPIC, and so many other colleagues from throughout the administration. I think their presence here today and their work really reflects President Obama's commitment to strengthening our economic and commercial ties with Africa through close and constant interagency collaboration. I also want to thank Secretary Pritzker and want to say on her behalf that she sends her apologies. She is missing today's meeting. As some of you know, President Obama asked her to join him for the North American Leaders Summit in Canada, and it turns out when the president asks, you can't say no. So she wanted me to pass along her regrets for not being here. But I do want to note how important the work of this council is and how important she views the work of this council and how much she would have liked to have been here today. She asked that I pass along your recommendations and share with you how much she values all of your service. As you all know, President Obama issued an executive order to create the council following the 2014 U.S.-Africa Business Forum here in Washington, when American companies announced over $14 billion of investments in Africa. The president charged Secretary Pritzker with assembling a council that could offer advice on how to create jobs in the United States and Africa through investment and trade, connect American businesses with potential African business partners, and keep the private sector engaged in policymaking and our investment strategy in Africa. Everyone on this council brings extensive experience in Africa and unique private sector perspectives to this table. You represent companies of every size and sector, from finance to agriculture to healthcare. and your recommendations have helped us to develop new strategies for increasing commercial engagement, creating jobs, and expanding economic opportunity throughout the United States and Africa. For example, your input helped us to launch an institutional investor roadshow, and we've already held 2 successful events. Our first event brought together delegations from 6 African nations to New York City to meet with 20 top U.S. investors. And earlier this spring, we held another event here in Washington following the U.S.-Nigeria Binational Commission meeting. Your recommendations were also instrumental to our ongoing development of a U.S.-Africa Infrastructure Center pilot project, our first ever cold chain symposium on East Africa, and which included the release of an assessment report on the Kenyan market, and the Department of Commerce's continued efforts to find digital solutions that address expansive and complex transportation challenges. Your recommendations also influenced our decision to organize a fact-finding trip to Nigeria and Rwanda, led by Secretary Pritzker earlier this year. I look forward to hearing from some of you on your insights from that trip later today. I know that she considers the visit to be one of the most significant trips that Penny has taken while at the Department of Commerce, and this says a lot for a secretary who's traveled to over 40 countries. Still, our work is far from complete. We must continue seeking solutions to build modern infrastructure, create more jobs and opportunity for young people, and expand access to education and the internet. President Obama believes, as do we, that increasing collaboration between U.S. business leaders and the African business community is essential to overcoming these challenges. At the 2014 U.S.-Africa Business Forum, the President made clear that he does not want to simply sustain our current role in trade and investment relationship. He wants to build on it. In other words, we have a mandate to strengthen our engagement with Africa. Our sustained focus on Africa is not just strategically important, it is also good business. According to the United Nations, Africa has the fastest growing middle class and the fastest growing population of any continent. By 2050, 25% of the world's population will be African, and this will increase to nearly 40% by 2100. Despite this tremendous growth, only a small percentage of U.S. companies currently do business in Africa. Together, we must do more to ensure that our businesses, investors, and entrepreneurs are able to capitalize on the extraordinary opportunities that await them in the continent. We are pleased that the Department of Commerce and Bloomberg Philanthropies will co-host a second U.S.-Africa Business Forum in New York City on September 21st. We are excited that President Obama and a number of African heads of state will attend. We plan for this year's forum to be even more successful than the last. We look forward to facilitating meetings and discussions at this year's forum that will spark new interest among investors and spur new business-to-business partnerships. In 2014, we answered the question, why Africa? This year, we will answer the question, how? How do we effectively do business in Africa? How can we grow partnerships between U.S. and African companies? How do we spur trade, investment, and job creation between our 2 continents? All current PAC DBI members are invited. You have spent over a year and a half working on these issues. We know that you have solutions to share. That's why we need you there. In 2012, before the creation of this council, President Obama announced his groundbreaking U.S. strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa. 4 years later, our administration is as committed as ever to Africa's future. That's why President Obama has directed the Department of Commerce to renew the PAC DBIA for another term. The Department of Commerce is committed to this council and the continuation of its mission to increase trade and investment and to build prosperity throughout the United States and Africa. Thank you for your time and effort that you have devoted to the PAC DBIA. I look forward to hearing your observations and recommendations today and for your continued engagement in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for that overview and summary, and also the history of actually what's happened. I'd like to now turn it over to Deputy National Security Advisor Wally Adeyemo. I'm not going to go through the full bios. Everyone has seen it, but I do think that if you look at the roles that you played in Treasury, in the White House, and in thinking about trade overall, let alone in Africa. We're delighted to have you here and hear your comments.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And on behalf of the President, I'd like to welcome you all here and thank you for the work that you have been doing on these very important sets of issues. I'm looking forward to the recommendations today, but more importantly, I think I'm looking forward to the conversation. As you all know, Africa faces a number of challenges, as does the global economy. You have low commodity prices, doing business is still too difficult. But to me, in economics, demographics is always king. And Africa has a huge demographic boom and a number of opportunities that provide advantages to the continent to grow their economy and also grow opportunities for not only African people but for U.S. businesses. And I think that this group exemplifies what we talk about when we say public-private partnerships. And I think that the idea that we are sitting here together thinking about how we can do business in Africa is critical to the President's agenda because Africa is truly an opportunity for growth of the American economy, but also growth of the African economy. The agencies gathered here are committed to this work, and a number of them have led in some of the President's signature initiatives, and those things that we have done have only been possible because of the work that they have done with those of you in the private sector. And I think that partnership is something that we are keen to lock in by not only renewing this organization, but expanding this organization in order to build some momentum going into the next administration. We think that it is critical that we find a way to do that in September when we will be having the Africa Business Forum, which we think will be an event that highlights the success that we have had over the years and gives us the ability to demonstrate some of the great deals that have been done by U.S. businesses in Africa. We look forward to you not only attending, but helping us build up a list of deliverables that allow us to demonstrate the true commitment that we have to the continent. And I'll end where I started by saying a word of thanks to you all. But the reality is that there is far more for us to do, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to do it with you. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Wally. I now want to turn it over to Robert Holliman, who's the Deputy U.S. Trade Rep. Obviously, you've been very busy over the last while, again, globally doing important deals, and I hope these trade negotiations will be complete. But we'd love to hear your perspectives on the opportunities for trade and investment.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the chair and the vice chair and the other participants who are here today. A year ago, Congress authorized a 10-year extension of AGOA under the Trade Preferences Extension Act of 2015. Pursuant to that act, USTR has two reports that are being released to Congress today. The first is a report, biennial report on the implementation of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And it updates Congress on the status of AGOA 1 year into its extension. And it serves to detail the U.S. sub-Saharan African trade relationship. We update Congress on the changes in country eligibility for AGOA benefits, and we highlight the regional integration efforts and the trade capacity building assistance that the U.S. government agencies provide to Africa. It also includes a section on countries that have expressed an interest in potentially reaching a free trade agreement and a summary of out-of-cycle review of South Africa's AGOA preferences. USTR is also releasing a second report today assessing the impact of the various U.S. trade preference programs, such as GSP, AGOA, the Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act, and how those programs address issues around poverty and hunger in beneficiary countries. This report concludes that the preference programs have made valuable and continuing contributions in reducing poverty and alleviating hunger in beneficiary countries, and remain a central element of our American trade policy overall, as one of numerous means by which we promote development and promote our trading partners. These two reports each highlight the importance of deeper relationships that the U.S. and this administration are committed to with our sub-Saharan African countries, in which the role of this advisory council and your members have been essential partners as we identify the next steps, the next opportunities to develop our trade and investment relationships throughout Africa. So thank you for the continued work that you do, the importance that you place and that this administration places on our U.S. trade and investment relationship in Africa. We look forward to hearing your recommendations today. Be interested in your thoughts as you review these reports that we provided to Congress, and look forward to a continuing discussion as you deepen your relationship and we deepen our relationship throughout Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Well, we're now going to get into the core of the agenda. And we're going to start with the trip report. And I think this trip, as the Secretary had said through your remarks, was very important for us to just get together as a council, sort of a hands-on perspective of some of the issues and opportunities. And I particularly thank Teresa and others for pulling this together. The group pulled it all together. And I thought I'd have Karen just give us some of the highlights. We're not going to go through it all here, but there was a sort of joint work in pulling these together, and that helped form the basis for the sort of third set of recommendations.
Thank you, Don. The trip very definitely had an impact on the recommendations that are included in our report. And the ability to actually sit down and converse and engage with the government officials and the business professionals in those countries was very, very helpful. While there are some key differences between Nigeria and Rwanda when you think about the size of the economy, the number of people that live in the respective countries, there were a lot of similarities actually that existed in those two countries, having to do with emerging markets and the need for basic infrastructure, the need to get it paid for. And there was also a lot of focus on small business jobs and entrepreneurs, which was consistent in both countries that we visited. As we visited in Nigeria, it was interesting. We had a very diverse group, again, of government officials, businesses, American businesses, Nigerian businesses, diplomats, and so forth. With that diversity, though, we still had great alignment around what the issues were that we really needed to address. So with that alignment, we had some very meaningful sessions where we took notes and came back with ideas that then eventually manifest themselves here in the recommendations that we have. Nigeria specifically, we talked about the need to get reliable power there more quickly. We talked about ways to provide additional funding, provide stability, all of those kinds of things that Nigeria needed. The government presented to us what they were going to do around those issues that we all had alignment with. And the government committed to address transparency. They committed to address the supply for the power. They committed to providing training and so forth. And also a key issue was to address corruption. So in Nigeria, we had a long list of things, and again, their government committed to making those steps. It will take a while, but nonetheless, they've committed to make those things happen. In Rwanda, while smaller, it was interesting because Rwanda has what they call the Rwanda Economic Development Authority. And it was, when you think about the ease of doing business, it was really helpful. We had our meeting at their offices, and they have a one-stop shopping environment where you had the ability, everything you need to start a business and begin commerce was contained in that facility. Not only was it in a single facility, but the time within which you had to get everything done was shortened by that expediency. So Rwanda was a very interesting trip. We also, of course, had the Eastern African countries there, and that allowed us to talk about opportunities to increase cross-border activities and work on other matters that would accelerate commerce there. One of the things that left really a very high positive impression upon me is the session that we had with the women entrepreneurs. And if you could listen to their stories, we were mesmerized by what they had gone through. They talked about the need for greater access to international markets. They talked about education and skills training to continue building their own workforces. And then ultimately, because they're starting up small businesses and they didn't have capital, the financing terms were often much higher than they could afford. But if we could take some of that story back and give them the help that they've asked for, they've got some more stories to tell. They can rewrite their story. So Rwanda was very interesting. And at the end of the days in Rwanda, when we were in the big session, some of you who were there, you might remember that President Kagame talked about, we know what needs to be done. Why aren't we getting it done? And I think these recommendations and the findings from that trip will help us move that forward. I would like to then call on Ms. Clark, who will give us some reflections from the trip as well.
Thank you very much, Karen and Dominic. I think that the recommendations that everyone has in writing really capture what we learned on this trip, and I'd like to highlight 3 points in particular with respect to the visit to Nigeria and 1 point with respect to the visit to Rwanda. With respect to Nigeria, I think there are 3 points that really came across being there on the ground. One was the quality of leadership in government. Second is a change in the culture on the ground relative to corruption. And third is an understanding of the deep entrepreneurial nature of the youth that we speak so much about, who are the future of that country and the continent. Starting with the quality of leadership in the cabinet, we had a very engaging session with all of the major portfolios. And just to put things into perspective, the leader of that delegation was the counterpart for our Secretary of Commerce, and that is their Minister of Trade and Investment. This gentleman has a background that is very understandable to many of us in the United States. He was trained in the U.S. with an MBA, worked on Wall Street for some time, and then started what is considered to be a very well-regarded private equity management firm in Nigeria that has raised 4 or 5 funds quite successfully. And this person gave up a very lucrative career in the private sector to serve his country. I think that that speaks very highly of the type of government that has been assembled in Nigeria, and that we can expect great things from a group of people who are so committed and are willing to make personal sacrifices in order to advance the interests of their public sector. Secondly is the change in culture relative to corruption. I think that we all know that this is something that's critical. We've talked about it. Anyone in this room who's worked on Africa has said those words many, many times, has written those words, has heard those words. But change doesn't come about just from a change in minds, but it comes about as a result of a change in heart. And I think that's really what one is seeing today in Nigeria, is that the attitudes are changing on the ground among the common person. It's the talk. It seems to be what people really feel in their hearts is essential to the development and advancement of the country. And so I think that that's something that I wanted to just highlight that may not come across on paper. The third aspect of the visit to Nigeria is around entrepreneurship, and we had an opportunity to see a number of young entrepreneurs present their business plans at the Tony Elumelu Foundation. And again, I think that this is something that you can't, it's hard to communicate on paper, and I hope that in the STRIP report we're getting some other things across that are sort of reading between the lines. That was just incredibly inspiring. I think that to appreciate the commercial sensibilities of young Nigerians in particular, their ingenuity to solve problems. We know Nigeria is a very difficult environment in which to operate, and yet young people have a number of opportunities. We all know that opportunities come from challenges, and there are no shortage of challenges in Nigeria, and hence there are no shortage of opportunities. And young people are using their ingenuity and creativity to address those, some of which come through technology. As an example of that, we had a chance to sit at round tables and meet some entrepreneurs beyond those who presented. I happened to sit next to an entrepreneur. Apparently in Nigeria, it's very difficult to get blood when you are in the emergency room at a hospital. And I met a young entrepreneur who has figured out an app kind of like Uber that gets blood to the hospital where you are. You can imagine how that would be very important and a way of organizing something critical in a society that hasn't organized that in any formal fashion. So I think those were the highlights for me in terms of what came out from the trip to Nigeria. I think the second point that I'd make with respect to Rwanda is just one that also has been emphasized, but I'd like to try to bring to life. And I think, as Karen said, that one-stop shop was incredibly inspiring to all who observed it. And I think it really speaks to the quality of leadership and what happens when government policies are coordinated, not just policies, but the operations in order to achieve a very clear vision for economic development. And so I think that this trip was very instrumental in helping to shape the recommendations that we have, and I think that we all walked away with a very good sense of what life is like on the ground to do business in both Nigeria and Rwanda, and hopefully that made our recommendations better informed. Thank you.
Jay, Iwan?
Thanks, Karen. It's kind of two ends of the spectrum on the trip that we took, in that you're in one country that has 160 million people and a large economy, and then the other one, the total amount of population doesn't fit in half of Lagos, but again with a vibrant economy. I think the trip, we did have one day in Lagos, an evening with the entrepreneur, or not the entrepreneurs, but the business, the private sector there. And I can tell you, operating there for the last 5 years, the Nigerian private sector is very vibrant and very strong. And we all know a lot of issues with the aspect of security, financing, the risk issues, et cetera. But there continue to be very strong companies and continue to make a big difference. We're very encouraged by the government, the new government, and what they've done. You heard earlier about the capability of the cabinet and the administration. They're working their way through issues as we speak, but there's still a good, solid, positive focus on it. But I think when you see Nigeria, you see a country that can feed itself but imports food, can fuel itself but imports gasoline, and basically uses the rail structure to transport less than any place almost in the continent. So there's a lot of opportunity, but these problems are big. You have to work with the government and the private sector, and I'm feeling encouraged now in after the trip. We've been back a number of times, and I might need that blood app. You never know, but I go back a number of times, and there's continued progress, and we're having a lot of discussions. And so from that perspective, this trip helped solidify that a little bit, and we're continuing to see that. You then go to Rwanda, and Rwanda is a small country, and one of the issues the big issue there that I think helps drive the success of the Rwandese is the regional focus of the East Africa community. And Rwanda is one of the hallmark countries in getting that done, and the leadership of President Kagame in doing that, versus the quote you heard from Karen was actually wrapped around the regional integration issues that they have. And I think that aspect is absolutely critical, because one of the things in Africa that this trip I thought highlighted, definitely for me, which I've seen, but hopefully for others, is in each region there tends to be one or two big countries. And there's 54 countries in Africa, and there are a lot of small ones. And they end up getting to be left aside during trips that come around. And the only way that we're going to make sure that we can get accessibility to all the aspects of trade, et cetera, is through regional integration, which I think we have EAC in the east, SADC in the south, and then ECOWAS in the west, some better than others, but that's going to be a key. And I think having a leader like President Kagame drive that from Rwanda's perspective in with Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, et cetera, is key. So I think from that perspective it was great. And I think the key takeaway in both countries is you've seen it in Rwanda on the ability to doing business and how important or how much improvement there's been. But you need the private sector and the public sector and the governments to work together. And that's going to be key for all of any success that we will see in Africa as far as getting them continued to be the fastest growing economies that are out there.
Thank you. Dal Wilson, I believe next.
Yeah, I think just to echo everything that's been said, maybe starting with thanks to the staff, especially for organizing this big and complicated trip. Trish was herding cats and did a great job, so let me just echo that. I think the only thing I'd say to add is it was very interesting to hear in Nigeria, the Nigerian government describe their own set of problems. I mean, it's one thing to have our perception, but it was another to hear them describe the world, according to their view. And they began with, the government transparency, rule of law, regulatory certainty. And, I think that was very interesting to hear that. At one point, they actually said, they recognize the fact that they're, I think, 169 out of 189 after Iran and Iraq on the ease of doing business scale. We didn't raise that, they did. So they're getting that and very anxious to change that perception. There are the priorities for around infrastructure, clearly power and transportation, which we experience personally in traffic, and information technology. Education and skills training was clearly a big focus. I represented the healthcare industry, and we had a healthcare roundtable and some of our own follow-ups since the trip. And skills training is a huge issue in all of these industries, but clearly very big issue to the healthcare professionals. And then the development of public and private partnerships to help them kind of bootstrap a lot of this effort was a big deal. I think those would be the things that I'd add to what's been said.
Thank you. Rahma Wright.
Thank you, Karen. I just want to start by thanking the Commerce team for organizing this incredible trip. It's a bittersweet moment now that our appointment is ending, and personally, I've really enjoyed serving with all of the council members. Being the entrepreneur in the group, it's been an incredible experience learning from senior level executives, and I really appreciate the opportunity I've had to serve my country in this way. In terms of the trip, I would just add on to what you said, Karen, regarding Rwanda and the support of women entrepreneurs. I think Rwanda is a great example of how when the government gets behind certain issues, progress can happen. The fact that Rwanda has the highest level of women participating in the government, and that they have developed legal frameworks that are specifically supporting women around issues of inheritance rights and access to land ownership is part of the reason why these women entrepreneurs have been able to be as successful as they have been. And as Rwanda is a leader in terms of regional integration, my hope is that the policies that they've put in place to support women is something that we can see happening in other countries in the region. Thank you.
Wally Adeosun, you have comments?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Let me add my thanks to Secretary Pritzker and the Commerce team for putting on such a wonderful trip as well. I think in Nigeria, obviously, we all know that President Buhari's goals when coming into government were threefold, which was to address the governance, security, and the economy. And I think he's done a great job, at least when it comes to security and governance. We're seeing improvement in that direction. The last part, economy, which is what we heard from a lot of the businessmen in the country, was all about the currency issue. And if you recall that everybody was having challenges with trying to repatriate the dollars out of Nigeria. And I think it's good to know that, though, that recently Nigeria just adopted a floating rate exchange policy, which will take care of the challenges most people have in that area. With Rwanda, it was very impressive, just like everybody touched on the one-stop shop and the regionalization aspect of it. It's very clear that President Kagame understands that that's the key for Rwanda. My fear, though, is that I'm not sure that Rwanda is able to lead that coalition. I suspect that he needs Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and we have to do what we can to help him through those countries to get there.
Okay. Want to move to that would be the
I
trip
don't know if there's
report.
any other members from the Commerce, department that wanted to add anything from the trip at all, any perspectives? Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was an amazing
want-
Sorry, and to learn from all of you and see Africa through your perspectives. It was an amazing chance for those of us to learn what really drives you, our clients, who are creating U.S. jobs through trade and investment and also creating jobs on the continent. So I couldn't have been more impressed with this delegation and was really glad that we had Secretary Pritzker and Assistant Secretary Jadot there with us, and this incredible team from both the Advisory Council's office with Tricia and Archana, as well as Michael Lally, who is our DAS for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, who unfortunately could not be with us today. But I know that he is also sincerely grateful for the opportunity that you all gave us to learn from you.
Thank you.
Dom, I'll only again echo our collective thanks to you and the other council members for your service. You brought a lot to the table, and throughout all the recommendations that you've developed, really made a contribution to the work that the interagency is doing. With respect to the trip, again, amazing opportunity to work alongside our private sector council members. And certainly among the takeaways, the enormous opportunity in Nigeria, the engagements that we had with the private sector on the ground, their willingness to share their concerns that you and the other council members reflected so well in the interaction with the leadership. So you said it best in terms of the demographics of the country and the continent. The opportunity for American businesses is very clear. And again, thanks to you and Karen and your entire team for giving so generously of your time in service of this presidential priority in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Any other comments? We might then shift to the recommendations. Again, in the report there's the full trip report with even more detail. But thank you everyone for that, kind of the highlights and the overview. So what we're going to do is go through each of the five. I'm sort of keeping a bit of an eye on the clock because we can't have a sort of, so forgive me if I cut people off at some point, but because we're not going to be able to go through all of it, but I'm also keen people get a chance to lob in their views or thoughts as we go through it. But we'll start first with the Power Africa and Energy Infrastructure recommendation, and I'll turn over to Karen to then hear more about it.
Was that comment for me?
Yeah.
No, our first recommendation relates to the energy and power, as Dominic just outlined. Everywhere we go, we understand about the importance of energy infrastructure towards the economies and the quality of life, security. All those things are very, very important. And as we put together this recommendation, it is both a continuation of previous recommendations that we are now refining and trying to make more actionable. So that's a real positive movement here. When we started 18 months ago, there was a lot of discussion about power, but we now have gotten to a place where we think we can leverage Power Africa and do some specific things in Nigeria, for example. There are going to be others that talk about this recommendation, so I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail, but I would just say that reliable power is critical for growing economies and the ability to continue to grow and meet the needs of the people in the various regions. So it's a very important aspect. And I think we are at a place where some of our U.S. companies, like GE is going to talk, Black & Veatch, so forth, where we can provide more competitive solutions to help bring this power to bear. There are some key aspects of the recommendation that address the need to have agreement with the Nigerian government about how much power we can put in play. We've agreed to 2,000 megawatts over the next 5 years. We have 2,600 that are in play now. We also have to have a market for the IPPs, independent power producers, so we've set up some frameworks for that to take place, and then ultimately addressing some of the financial and capital needs and helping the distributing companies. So with that, I will turn it over to Jay to begin some of the more detailed conversation around the recommendation and its importance to us moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Karen. From a power standpoint in Nigeria, it's obviously one of the critical aspects to their economic growth. We, had a lot of review with this with both the private sector and the government team when we were there in January. Subsequent to that, we have performed a little bit of a study, and one of the things that highlighted to me is what I would say is a very tough at time right now from a standpoint of the Nigerian economy to continue to grow with the power deficits that are there. They have 12 gigawatts that are installed. Of that 12, 7 of it is operable. Of that, and these numbers I'm going from memory right now, but a couple gigawatts are stranded from no gas availability, maintenance issues, et cetera. So fundamentally, it comes down to about roughly about 2 to 3 gigawatts that are available for transmission. The issue of generation is key, obviously. Some of it's fixing what's there, some of it's getting the stranded assets, whether it doesn't have transmission and or doesn't have fuel, but there's equipment there, are all pieces of what they need to work on, and the power minister is working on that. We've had a subsequent meeting with him as well. However, one of the key weak points is actually the transmission and distribution. If the Nigerians had 7,000 gigawatts or 7 gigawatts of power to transmit, the transmission system can only handle half of that. And so there's no sense in putting in a lot more generation if it can't get distributed. And I think that's something that, from a standpoint of Power Africa and what the U.S. government can do, is an area that we ought to think about. The transmission in most value chains of power tends to be the hardest part to get financed, especially from the commercial side. And it's also and it's typically managed by government, so there tends to be a lot of political aspects. And also tied to that is the DISCOs, the distribution companies. And there it's a combination of collection capability, roughly 44%. On average, 44% goes uncollected in Nigeria. So that some of these are as high as 90 go uncollected. Others are as good as 2. And it all depends on investment in prepaid meters, et cetera. So there's solutions there. But again, when we think about private sector coming in and focusing in on it, and one of the recommendations that I think we need to think about is there a way that we can work and make sure that through the value chain, fuel, generation, transmission, distribution, to the country, who can invest where? Who should be DFI? Who should be private sector, et cetera? And I think that's something that we could probably work together in putting together some framework. The other piece, Nigeria is a piece of that, but also elsewhere in Africa right now is a sense of urgency in getting these power projects done from the standpoint of the governments. I'm continually amazed that I don't get calls every day asking me why we're not getting certain projects completed. And most of the time, we're waiting for administration or procedural issues in the countries. And so, again, I think that's a role potentially for a Power Africa to really play for us as well. And then finally, I think thinking about one of the, this may be a little controversial, but maybe countries ought to earn themselves to be part of Power Africa, and that's by having the ability to continue, seeing what the opportunity is and then moving forward with the right steps. So it was again, the highlight of the meeting was again focusing in on what the issues were from a Nigerian perspective, especially in power. They're the ones with the biggest deficit, and fixing that is going to be absolutely critical. And when you look at it from a standpoint of the grid having less capability than the diesel generators in country, that's also an environmental issue as well.
Next, we have Gail Smith.
Let me just start out also by echoing the thanks. I think part of what we wanted in creating this was serious partners in the private sector to help us really up the game and lift up an Africa policy that I think has often felt, and I've been in government twice and worked on this for many years, as the thing we get to after all the other foreign policy issues are covered. And I think this president has quite deliberately elevated it, but this group and your work has really helped us to do that. So we're very thankful for that. I would just say a couple things. Generally on Power Africa in this recommendation, we have our Power Africa coordinator here, and we've got Elizabeth and Lee and Wanda, and we've got the whole crew is here because this fortunately is a broad interagency effort. And one specific thing about Nigeria, as a matter of policy, and we've been quite focused on Nigeria, getting the power sector where it needs to be is something that I think we've all agreed is a top priority. But that's also married to something else that President Buhari has pointed out, which is that Nigeria made a strategic error 25 years ago and has made it every year since, which was the failure to diversify the economy. So we are also and simultaneously working with them on how do you do that, particularly the agriculture sector where they have great potential, while also dealing with things like a shocking fact is their statistics on maternal child health rival the Democratic Republic of Congo and Somalia. So we're on a multi-front effort on Nigeria, not to mention the security arrangements, but power, Jay, I think as you rightly suggest, is front and center. A couple things about Power Africa that I think may be useful as we think through this recommendation, and I think the idea of a framework and many of the specifics you lay out are things that our agencies have been quite focused on, and I think working together on how we might accelerate some of those. But if you take a step back, the outcome we were trying to achieve was doubling access to electricity in Africa and increasing wattage, megawatts and gigawatts and everything else. The problem we were trying to solve is that there were potential good projects, potentially willing capital, and the two were not getting together. And what we were up against was, as you all well know, perception of risk, regulatory problems, real risk, the absence of sufficient tools, and the fact that nobody was really organized to help break down those risks. I think that's one of the things that Power Africa has taught us, and it occurred to me in looking at your recommendation on transportation and air and road links, that what have we learned about infrastructure development, which is that there's no silver bullet, that what we need is a BB gun to get into the middle and break down the obstacles one by one. So one thought on Nigeria would be, how do we break the pieces that you describe into manageable incremental chunks? Because I think President Buhari is absolutely serious. I think most members of his government are, and I think the population is very serious in terms of the way they voted. The systemic change they need to make is breathtaking. And so I think if we can figure out how would we break it into pieces and sequence it would be very easy. And I think, Jay, you're right. I think we share the frustration that often the lag in getting a transaction to close is one of these constraints that's posed a problem in the first place. And so that's part of what we're trying to do with transaction advisors. But I think in Nigeria, if we can do that, we're also going to need strategic patience. And this is where we really need your help. It's not going to be fast because we'll get agreement here and there, and we'll have the capacity here and there, and we'll run into somebody on the regulatory slide that is either slow or hasn't gotten the message about the president's views on corruption. So we might want to think about how can we work together on this, but create expectations that are ambitious, but also realistic given again the challenges that are Nigeria. And I defer, Andy, you may want to add, or other colleagues in terms of more specifics.
Yeah, we should recognize Andrew, who's been playing a critical role all the way throughout this, so I would love to hear your comments.
Great, thank you. So we're thrilled with the recommendations. I want to commend the work of of the Advisory Council. And really because what you've done is you've taken the same sort of focused approach that we really need to be successful. You didn't come up with recommendations that were broad across the continent, and you chose one country, and it's very consistent with what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and what we're planning to do. And if you look at Nigeria, and people ask us about, you know, how's Power Africa going, it's going quite well, but our numbers don't reflect that, and that's largely because of some of the issues that we faced in Nigeria related to currency and commodity prices over the last year, and those seem to be getting sorted out. So I think a lot of the investors have been on the sidelines and are ready to go in. That being said, we look at many of the U.S. government agencies, which have been tremendously successful with Power Africa, with OPIC already exceeding its $1.5 billion commitment to Power Africa. We have USTDA, which has given nearly 50 grants already related to feasibility studies and otherwise. So we're on the right track. But what's most important is if you look at the roadmap that we launched back in January, it tracks deal flow. And a lot of that deal flow that we need to be successful is in Nigeria. And it impacts all levels of the value chain, from distribution to transmission to generation. And so these recommendations are consistent with what that need is. And we've been responding to it all along. We now have 20 advisors on the ground, and that's what makes Power Africa sort of unique. We have this boots on the ground mentality, and we have the ongoing interaction with pretty much everybody who's sitting around this table to find out what do we need to be doing to take a focused approach to make sure that we can achieve our results. So our key points of what we're doing are, one, we're taking an approach of advancing specific projects in a focused way. And if you look at OPIC's and many of the people around this table, again, their role on the Azuro-Edo gas project last summer, we identified one piece of that project that was causing it to get stalled. And we had so many people giving that same consistent message, and that when President Buhari returned to Nigeria last summer after his visit here, he did what he needed to do to unstick that project, and that will unleash other projects. We need to continue to take that deal by deal focused approach to identify obstacles that we can actually overcome, and at the same time continue to do the capacity building that our colleagues at Commerce and TDA and USAID are doing as well. So we applaud the work that everyone's doing. It's completely consistent with the approach that we want to take, and we hope that this group will continue in its next iteration to continue to maintain its focus on power, and in Nigeria in particular.
I say in its next iteration, yes, but those of you who are in the current iteration are welcome to continue working with all of us in your future non-iterative steps.
Thank you.
Could we turn it over to Elizabeth, and I think we'll have to close this part off, if that's okay, Elizabeth, but given the OPIC conversation. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Dominic. I just want to say thank you again to all of you for your service on this advisory council. You know, just as a small but vital and telling indicator of just how important Africa has become to the Obama administration, you know, of OPIC's $20 billion portfolio, a full third of it now is in Africa. And in 2015, 40% of our deals were in Africa, which is up from, you know, single digits only 10 years ago. So this is something we've taken very seriously. And then the second point I wanted to make is just on Power Africa. It really has been extraordinary to see how the material impact this initiative has had. We've seen developers coming to the table that never would have thought about Africa before that are now actually financing things on the continent. We've seen an unprecedented coordination amongst the USG agencies and tools so that developers can look at all of us together at one time at one side of the table as to how we can be helpful. We've also seen an alignment of our different tools and instruments across the U.S. government being brought together on specific projects. So that's meant real-time, transaction-specific support, hiring lawyers, extending power purchase agreements that we've never seen before in the U.S. government. And then finally, we've seen a really remarkable mobilization of diplomatic resources, usually at the ambassador level, really digging in, rolling up their sleeves, and being willing to go to the mat to unstick deals that otherwise might have languished. So, you know, all of that has enabled, frankly, OPIC as a member of the Power Africa family to catalyze over $3 billion in investments that wouldn't have happened otherwise through about 1.7, I think Andy said, of our financing support and in about 19 different projects. So I think Power Africa has really far exceeded the expectations that the market had of it. And I just want to, again, hats off to the USA team led by Andy, because it really has been an extraordinary whole-of-government effort. The last thing I just want to mention is we at OPIC, of course, are very supportive of the recommendations and push on Nigeria. You know, frankly, if the macroeconomic and legal issues in Nigeria could be solved, all of Power Africa's goals could be met in that one country alone. And in fact, right now, OPIC is working on 20 separate power projects in Nigeria to the tune of about $2 billion, which, by the way, would more than exceed the 2,000 megawatts that you mentioned, Karen. But we can't get that done. We're just not going to get it done for two reasons. One is we're not big enough, and that will always be a problem. But secondly, some of the legal hurdles in that country are really, really difficult to get over. And so I would just close by a plea to this terrific advisory group. If you all could tackle specifically some of the very technical, specific legal hurdles that are holding back not only OPIC's financing, but all of the other development finance institutions that are providing the bulk of the financing for power on the continent, it would make a big difference in moving the needle on rolling out power in Africa. So again, just thank you for your service. I just want you all to take away just from our perspective that you really have helped move the needle significantly in this administration on supporting Africa.
So as Dominic said, we have some other recommendations that we'll need to move through, but I do want to thank USAID and Power Africa, OPIC, USTDA, the many agencies that have really worked to bring this together and will have the responsibility in many ways to get it to the next level and implement it. So it's a very important topic, and we appreciate everyone's interest. So we're going to have to move, though, to the next recommendation. Thank you, Bill.